Hello and hello and good afternoon, everybody. Hoping you are well. It's lovely to see you. Um, I put in as a holding title for the shiur because the office was keen to put things up that I would be talking about Seder night that falls on Motzei Shabbat, and I'll certainly go through some of the details of that. I've written it up as an article. There's a magazine that's going out to all members, hopefully very shortly, possibly with your billings, but going out very soon. And it has got lots of information about Seder night that falls on Motzei Shabbat and everything. So I'll be talking through that at the end. What I want to do beforehand is just look at a topic which is interesting and featured in an article that I came across, or an essay that I came across in a book, and I will get onto that in just a second. Let me share a screen with you. So what you are looking at now is a page from, and the frontispiece of, the Golden Haggadah, which is a 14th century Catalonian Haggadah in the British Library. And in fact, if I can plug the British Library, it has many wonderful pieces of Judaica, and indeed fabulous pieces of everything, which are digitized, and the entirety of this Haggadah is available for perusal online. It's called the Golden Haggadah. It's got a lot of gold leaf in it. It's very rich. The Golden Haggadah plus its regular pages are all there, as are many others, and it's widely referenced. It's one of the most ornate, oldest Haggadahs we've got, probably from Catalonia, possibly Barcelona, and almost certainly left Spain with the Jews with the expulsion in 1492. So looking at the topic of slave wealth and the essay that I am referencing, which the first part of which I'll be looking at, and there are other sources that I'm also drawing on, is from Dr. Erica Brown, who people will remember as a teacher here. She was a teacher of Mandy's 30 odd years ago at Sixth Form Center, and then we were fortunate to live in Efrat at the same time when I started my smicha studies. She is a wonderful and charismatic Jewish educator. She's published not only on Jewish topics, but also a wonderful book on bereavement and facing mortality that came out, I think, a year ago. This is her book, Seder Talk. And other books that she's written, a wonderful one on Esther, I think there's one on Ruth, definitely one on the Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, definitely one on, I wish I could remember the name of the festival for a moment. Definitely the one on the period leading up to Tisha B'Av, and as well as having, in this she has got a full Haggadah with notes. You can't see that, you're not going to read it anyway, but she's also got essays for each day of Pesach. Not that I'm trying to sell or promote the book, but it's always nice to have something where you've got a Haggadah that you can share with people or give to them, where there is something different to read beyond just the commentaries. And I think if it was just the essays, which are wonderful essays, people might not read it, but if you're giving a present and you're giving a Haggadah as well, they'll use the Haggadah and dip into it. So I think it's a good strategy, and definitely well worth reading. So she asks a question and begins her essay, as do a couple of people online who are addressing exactly the same, and in other places, who are addressing exactly the same topic. The pasuk that we have is Vashem Natan et chen ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim. The Lord has disposed the Egyptians favorably towards the people. So there are many different translations of exactly what that is. And then they let them have their request. Vayishelum, the word she'elah, to borrow, to request, to demand. But we took the wealth of the Egyptians, Vainatzulu et Mitzrayim, and we despoiled Mitzrayim, Egypt. We'll look at the English translations and some of the questions about that as well. So Erica points out in this particular corner, it's the bottom right, if you're looking at me, or maybe it's the bottom left if you're looking at me. It's by my right hand. It's the bottom of this is the bottom lower half of the page. You can see the Hebrews and the slaves, and they definitely are the slaves because they're dressed in simple tunics rather than the more ornate dress of the Egyptians, which you can see elsewhere on the picture behind me. But they're dressed in simple clothes, each one of them removing one of these grandiose chalices. This is clearly modeled not on Egyptian chalices, but what you'd have found in Catalonia at the time, sort of a half to a third of the body height of a human being. The four slaves are removing these as part of taking away the wealth of the Egyptians. And one of the things that is pointed out by Erica in her piece is that if you look at the faces of these people, they've got resolve, but they're not looking happy. They don't look as if they're actually running out of Egypt about to escape. They're, you know, if I was to be given a chalice that size, I'd be looking a lot happier than that. So, you know, we're not sure if it is apprehension or grim fatalism, you know, what exactly lies behind this, you know, this expression. Of course, this is just a picture and a representation, but it's troubling. You know, why is it that we went around the houses seeking out the Egyptian wealth? Was that the right thing to do? Hadn't they suffered enough? Is this good moral conduct? And we'll look at that. So Hashem, right at the outset, promised that there would be a gift to, or the Bnei Yisrael, when they left Egypt, would leave with great substance. We know from the Brit Ben Habatarim, where Hashem promises the exile, V'yomer Avram, Yado Teda, no, Ki ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem. They're going to be a stranger in a land that is not their own. Va'avadum, and they will serve them. Ve'inu otam, and they will oppress them. Arba ma'ot shana, for 400 years. And this is the promise of exile. And then after, and the 400 years is something that is discussed very widely, how they are counted, because we were not 400 years slaves, but possibly 400 years from the point of this promise. Different commentators assess it differently. And then it says, V'gam et hagoy asher ya'avodu dan anochi. I will, says God, judge the people who you are serving. Va'acharei ken, and after that, Yetzeu, Bnei Yisrael will leave, B'rechush gadol, with great substance or great wealth. So the promise that we would leave Egypt not as fleeing slaves, but people who were a wealthy nation, comes straight out of this original promise to Avram. Rashi on B'rechush Gadol says, B'mamon Gadol, lots of money, K'moshe Ne'emar, as it says in the verse that we looked at just a moment ago, Vainatzulu et Mitzrayim. They are going to despoil the Egyptians. And here the despoil line is the one I just cut and paste this out of Sefaria there. So this is their translation, or the one that they've got. Now, Avraham himself was not somebody who started off or finished up as poor, but he accumulates wealth over his time. And we've got many references to his wealth. Well, Avram heitiv ba'avora, through Sarai, Avram becomes rich. V'yilo tzon uvakav v'chamorim v'avadim u'shvachot v'atonot v'gmalim. He gets sheep, oxen, asses, male, female slaves, she-asses, and camels. Avram kaved ma'od b'mikneh b'kesev u'v'zahav. Avram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold. Now, if you notice, we're talking about Avram rather than Avraham here. Avram himself is someone who is, this is the early stage. This is before the birth of Yitzchak. Vayikach Avimelech tzonu v'akar v'avadim u'shvachot. Again, Avimelech, following a deception where Avram pretends that Sarai is his sister, Avimelech hands over a fortune of sheep and oxen, male, female slaves, gives them to Abraham, restores his wife, and Avimelech says, here's my land before you, settle wherever you please. To Sarai says, I give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver to serve you as a vindication. So there is no poverty for Avraham. And the picture that we've got here, which is, I think, one of Dore's prints from his Bible illustrations, is Avraham paying out money to Ephron for the cave of Machpelah, weighing out the shekels. Of course, there was no coinage in those days, so it would have been a weight of silver rather than shekel coins. And here you can see that's Ephron sitting there. Avraham himself is someone who is comfortable in his attire, and there's no suggestion of poverty. So Avram starts off, or ends off, his life as having reasonable substance. And we know that Yitzhak, even though he needed to dig the wells of his father, there's no suggestion that he was impecunious. And despite the famine, there's no suggestion that Yaakov himself was impecunious, saying he comes down with some considerable substance into Egypt. Nonetheless, the idea that we're going to get the wealth of the Egyptians is found not only in the original promise to Avram, it is found 3 times in Shemot leading up to the Exodus itself. And the phraseology is very similar, as you can see here, even if there are subtle nuances. And I've highlighted a couple of ideas in the red and the green there. So if you're not colorblind, you'll be able to follow along. V'natati et chen ha'am hazeh. Says Shemot 3, this is early in the story, B'nei Mitzrayim, I'll dispose the Egyptians favorably towards this people, so that when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. Lo telahu rekam. V'sha'ala isha mishchenata, o migarat beta, and each woman shall borrow from her neighbor or from the person who is lodging in her house, clay kesef, uklei zahav, silver and golden vessels, usmalot and clothing, v'samtem al b'neichem v'al b'notechem, and you'll place these on your sons and your daughters, v'nitzaltem et Mitzrayim. Thus you shall strip the Egyptians. You will take their possessions from you. Again, the translation that I've copied there was from Sefaria. A little bit later on in chapter 11, Diberna ba'oznei ha'am, speak to the people. V'shalu ish me'et re'ehu, and every man should ask his neighbor. V'isha me'et ruta, and every woman from hers, clay kesef clay zahav, silver and golden vessels. V'yiten Hashem et ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim, and Hashem will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards us. Gam ha'ish Moshe, gadol ma'od, Moses himself will be much esteemed be'eretz Mitzrayim in the eyes of the Egyptians, be'enei avdei paro, in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants, uvenei ha'am, and in the eyes of the people. So we've got 2 things that are going on here. We've got the idea of asking the Egyptians for their wealth, and we've got this other idea that somehow reputation and the way that we are perceived by the Egyptians comes into it. And in all cases, it says we're going to be well received, or they're going to be well disposed towards us, which is very nice indeed. Uvnei Yisrael asu kidva Moshe. This is now after the 10th plague. the children of Israel do exactly what is said, and they ask the Egyptians for the klei kesef u'klei zahav, their silver and golden vessels. V'Hashem natan et chen ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim, and the Egyptians, through God's agency, now are favorable towards the people of Israel. Vayash ilum v'yinaltzu et Mitzrayim, and they let them have their request, and they stripped the Egyptians. Again, translation, interesting. But this happens. And when is this happening? This is happening now as we're leaving Egypt. It's not happening when we might have been able to comfortably secrete the Egyptian wealth away, which is during the 9th plague of darkness. You know, we could have crept in, taking advantage of the fact that we were able to see and they were not. We could have crept in and taken stuff. It's not how it happened. We go and we ask. Why are we going and asking? Happy for anybody to chip in now and suggest why are we asking them for their wealth?
I am puzzled.
Go on.
Because at least in modern Hebrew, lehash'il and lish'ol is to borrow, but it's to be given back the same item. In other words, you borrow a vessel and you give back the same vessel. But lehalvot appeals to money or milk. If you want to borrow something, you don't give back the same money that you've taken. You give back other coins, other bits of money, and the same with milk or an egg. So, but here there's no intention to ever give it back. So this is my puzzlement.
So hang on. If you're absolutely right. This idea is there, and when we talk about somebody who is a sho'el, who is borrowing, leading to a shomer, someone who becomes a guardian in Mishnaic and Talmudic references, we are talking about giving back the same thing and having acharayut, responsibility for the same thing. But if you were going around to a neighbor to borrow sugar, which you know, clearly we do all the time these days, it's the only way you can get to see your neighbors, is that halva'ah rather than she'ela?
Yeah, in modern Hebrew anyway. Yes,
Hebrew. So we draw it's a valuable distinction, because there's a difference between borrowing something and giving back the same thing and borrowing something and giving back its equivalent. Anybody want to make any comments on the idea that we are, number one, asking for it, and number two, getting it at all?
Can I say, if you're getting it, the idea would be that if you're accepting the word borrowed, but you don't have to give back the exact same one, what they had to give back, they already gave through their hard work.
Yes. Right. So you're recharacterizing the whole transaction.
Yeah, saying
we're getting our wages.
Payment. So this
we're getting our wages. So we're asking for our wages. And you know, the shol is also to ask. So we could be asking for our wages. Why are we asking them? So, you know, Shirley's come up with a perfectly grand idea there.
Not really original.
It's not at all original. It's not at all original. It's my last slide as well, but it's an important idea.
So nobody could ever accuse them of stealing, of killing, you know, of despoiling. Actually, nobody could accuse them of just stealing, being thieves.
Right. Okay, perfectly good answer. Okay, so we actually have, and this isn't universal. And we have an idea that booty is a bad thing. And there are a couple of instances in the Joshua story where, for example, with the destruction of Jericho, where Joshua says that you are not allowed to take additional booty for yourselves. Here it says, if you take anything from that which is prescribed, and the word cherem is used, which is the same as sort of haram, It's something that you're not allowed to do. Hashem himself has put a ban on it. And if you were to do that, you are actually going to create harm to the Israelite encampment. And the silver and the gold and the objects of copper are consecrated to Hashem. We're not entitled to that to which we are not entitled. Just because you've got a military victory, and especially if it's one where Hashem has been playing a role, there is this idea that you're not entitled to take it. So just because you are able to leave Egypt and the Egyptians are disadvantaged doesn't give you carte blanche to rummage around their houses and take their huge golden goblets, as in the picture behind me. So that is one of the ideas that's there. So with regards to borrowing, our commentaries have got a number of interesting observations. So it says, so the Ibn Ezra says, V'natati, I'll give, Gamzeh, Hayad Devar Pella. This is a wondrous thing. Shemitzrayim hayu mechayim Yisrael sheyashalu mehem. The Egyptians were appeasing to the Israelites because they asked this from them. V'zetam vayishalum. The reason we asked was in order to do it nicely. Mishpat Anshe Holam. This is the opposite of the way it would normally done. So there is this idea of asking in order to create a positive idea that they would give it to us, even though it's quite possible that there is deception in there and they thought they were giving it to us and we would be giving it back afterwards. So this is one idea, but the she'elah is to be mefayes. It is to appease or to make the relationship easier. Sforno says, "Afal pi shetekablu hakol mehem derech hashe'elah." Even though this was all given through a request, borrowing kind of things, but hiyu chayavim lahachazir, and they would have needed to return it. Hine taknu achar kach et hakol badin, v'radfam achreihem lilachem bahem. And afterwards, it was our ownership was legitimate, even though we had only said borrow, because in provoking, as this did, the Egyptians to chase after us, and then to be vanquished by us at the sea. Ki amnam kasher meitu ba'ota hamilchama, haya bedin midah keneged midah, kol shalal harodfim l'nirdafim. All the booty of the pursuers falls to the pursued. So even if we had only borrowed it and possibly didn't have an entitlement, when they chased after us, possibly because they said, we'd lent you these golden goblets, why on earth aren't you giving them back to us? Was there an idea that we would get to the land of Israel, set up the Mishkan, and when we did that, we would send them their gold back now that we were nicely established? I think possibly not. So the Egyptians chase after us. They want their bounty back, and but because they chased after us and because they lost the battle at the sea, in the way of normal affairs, we are entitled to the booty salvaged from the pursuers, and that's what the Sforno says is happening there. So our appropriation was later justified. Now, the idea of how it's used in English is something that actually comes up, in a number of commentaries, and it's dangerous to litigate the English on Hebrew texts. So we've got enough trouble with the Hebrew in the Hebrew texts. Where does the English become important? The English becomes important in as much as other people reading the same story glean their impressions of what's going on from their translations, because they're not all Hebrew scholars. Now, Selig Newman was a Hebrew scholar. He was a Jewish translator who's written many, many works in translation. And here I've got a copy of his Hebrew lexicon composed after Johnson's dictionary. I think he was born in Germany, died, I think, in America. I think that's where he's buried. He says there are many passages in which the King James Version translators were decidedly wrong, and such cases may prove dangerous to the infidel by strengthening him in his unbelief, as well as to the believer by raising doubts in his mind of the authenticity of a book which apparently contains so many incongruities. So we've got a number of different ways that the borrowing is supposed to be done. And so Selig Newman here is saying, number one, it looks bad to the non-Jews if they don't like the story. And number two, it looks bad to the Jews if we can't resolve the problems within the story. And it says, for example, one shall borrow of his or her neighbor. But the meaning in the original is not to borrow, but ask, as in to ask or demand. You know, it is absolutely true that a she'elah, when you're talking about borrowing something, you're borrowing something, as I said, with the intention of returning it. But if if it's a sort of stand and deliver kind of request, it's not up for negotiation. And so here, what Selig Newman says, this is perfectly in accord with justice, while the permission or order to borrow without intending to restore, being a license to defraud, could not have emanated from a fountain of justice. So if it says borrow, it makes us look as if we are cheats and scoundrels, and that is not a good thing. But he says the word itself ought not ever to have been translated as borrow. It should have been ask or demand, and therefore we're going around the Egyptian houses and we're saying, pay up, you know, hey, look what we've done to you already. I don't imagine that it's going to get any better for you. We're leaving, pay up. And that's the way that Selig Newman wanted this to be understood. And Chief Rabbi Hertz says, every woman should borrow of her neighbor. This translation is thoroughly mischievous and misleading. If there was any borrowing, it was on the part of the Egyptians, who'd been taking the labor of the Israelites without recompense. In modern times, enemy of the Bible vie with one another in finding terms strong enough in which to condemn the deceit practiced on the Egyptians. He says these translations become a license for anti-Semitism. As we have language like that, and we are letting the Bible be used against us, and we ultimately pay the price. And it's our responsibility, therefore, to promote the acceptable English translation of the Hebrew. And for example, Koren in its Tanakh has always been very careful to do that. And even though you might buy Hebrew books published by Jewish publishing houses, sometimes the translations are not authentic Jewish translations. They've taken advantage of other public domain material, etc. And less so now. But it was very important, for example, to Rabbi Sachs to have his own translation of works and to work on that, in order to make sure that not only did it contain the nuances that he wanted to put across, but also very much because the way language is used influences our understanding. And if we are constantly referencing other people's translations of our work, then we lose not only ownership of the language. All the Christians I speak to imagine that the Psalms were theirs. I used to think Psalm 23 was at least, I'm claiming them on behalf of King David and Asaph and the others, but they're ours. And the language was Hebrew, and the understanding is in Hebrew. And so Rabbi Hertz, making a very important point 100 years ago, was that if we lose control of the language of the Bible and argue the Bible, discuss the Bible using Christian translations, we are dignifying a vehicle which can be used to attack us, which is not good news. So a couple of perspectives on the asking and the borrowing. Rashbam says, "V'she'ela isha mishchenata," a woman should ask her neighbor, b'matana gemura. We're talking not about a loan, we're talking about a definite gift. And he supports it, saying that the word she'ela is used in this sense where it says shari katuv v'natati et chen ha'am, and the people are going to be well disposed to you. And then it says kamo sha'al mimeni ve'etne goyim nachlatzacha, I ask of me and I will give you the nations as a inheritance. Zehu ikar pshuto. This is what we need to turn around and say to the scoffers or the people who are attacking us. I mean, there are other places where she'ela is being used absolutely as asking something which is for an absolute gift and does not have the connotation of, hang on, there's just a bit of noise in the background there. Does not have the connotation of...
Shirley is not muted. Please tell her to mute Shirley. She's not muted. She's making all the noise there. Shirley.
All right, it's gone quiet. Okay. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch raised the point that that Chai said before. Asking leads to transparency. In the event that we ask for it, nobody's able to say you stole it. It's clearly the appropriation was one which was done with legitimacy. Abarbanel says entitlement yields respect. It's part of one of his longer answers, and Abarbanel, if you've studied him, you'll know has quite lengthy answers or piles up a number of questions in order to answer them all together in an essay, which means that if you do the search in Responsa for the word she'ela, looking for this, you find every single question that he asks with the she'ela, and then he says, and the she'ela as I'm answering it. So it's harder to find the reference. But what he says is entitlement yields respect. That's a translation of the idea. He doesn't use that as an expression. Entitlement yields respect. When we asked the Egyptians for it, and we said to them, this is what we want, they knew that we were coming to them not as sniveling underhand thieves, and this wasn't a begging kind of thing. It's I'd like to borrow this, implies we are keeping this, and there's a certain effrontery in doing that. We are showing ourselves to have status. We had been slaves. We had been the people who would take what we could, and we were weakened, which is the way Abarbanel is characterizing us. And it's not clear that actually we were slaves in the sense that people might otherwise understand slaves. We lived on our own land, we had our own houses, and we did have our own wealth, and we'll get back to that in a second. But Abarbanel is suggesting that the very fact that we went up to the Egyptians and asked of them, as we asked of them, it said we have a sense of who we are. And the Egyptians, in seeing we had a sense of who we were, suddenly had a different approach to us. They no longer looked upon us as the underdog. They saw us as people who were not going to just be mousy and hide. The fact that we were asking, rather than just stealing, the fact that we were asking was indicative of our own sense of self-worth. Ramban, in his commentary on Ketubot, raises an idea of, and this is, Erica brings this into her book. There's no real length of time spent on it or its significance here, and it's just a line in the Ramban. But a statement of Rabbi Meir, we're very familiar with the idea that Shlosha Devarim ein omdim bifnei pikuach nefesh. There are three things that you should rather die than do. which are sins. Ve'luhein avodah zara gilui arayot v'shvichot damim. You're not allowed to perform immoral acts. You're not allowed to, idolatry, immoral acts, or murder. Rabbi Meir omer af gezel. You're not allowed to steal. You should rather die than steal. Meaning that had Rabbi Meir read Les Miserables, he would have sided with Javert rather than Jean Valjean, and you should rather die than steal, even to save your life. This is what is being highlighted here. But Ramban, in putting it in, says we've got a very strong repugnance to theft. And even though we highlight the big three, we shouldn't imagine that those are by themselves and the only view. And Rabbi Meir, who is a very definite authority and scholar, teaches that theft is also such a thing, and therefore it's important that we would ask and borrow rather than steal in order to have some entitlement. And again, this would be why to take it while we had easy opportunity during the plague of darkness, so that the Egyptians emerged from the darkness and suddenly found that they had visitors in the night, was not acceptable. We needed to go to them and make the request, according to Ramban. So there's within the point that Selig made before, said you look at the inconsistencies in what's happening. I look at who's doing the asking. In the first case, we had She'ela Isha Mishchenata. We have the woman doing the asking. In the second case, Vishalu Ish meit re'ehu v'isha meit ruta. You have the man asking his neighbor and the woman hers, and the lodgers, etc. And then in the third case, you have Vishalum. It's generally done. Who is responsible for asking whom? And some of the commentators go into, I think the Ibn Ezra goes into an idea that it's more natural for women to go around borrowing this or that. And Abarbanel also makes a reference that suggests, each one of them referencing the way these things were seen in their day and their time as who had the interactions. But it's clear from the commentary, or so it's clear from the sources, that this was a collective enterprise. Men and women were separately supposed to be involved in coming up to the Egyptians. Provocative or friendly. So we're told that the Egyptians will look favorably upon us. That was that's what we were told in all three of these verses. So the Chizkuni says, "V'shelo ma shekayem HaKadosh Baruch Hu achrei ken yetzu b'rechush gadol b'inyan she'ela v'lo b'inyan matana." It's asked in terms of a question rather than a gift. Kadeshiyu Mitzrayim lohitim liridof achreihem, in order that the Egyptians will be impelled to chase after them later. And it says v'yesh makomot v'yishalu lashon matana. It's possible in other places that Sheila is talking about a gift, but here the idea of the Chizkuni is it's to provoke them to follow. And then it says me'et re'ehu. Why does it say re'ehu? When we talk about ava v'achva v'shalom v're'ut, it's talking about a companionship. Re'im ahovim, we're talking about neighbors and proximity, a close relationship. Were the Egyptians well disposed towards Israel? It comes to teach us sha'acharei hamakot. After the plagues, hayu kurei, kureim va'ahuvim. They were like neighbors and beloved, in order to lend them. So there's a play here. Kureim is also lichroa, is also to prostrate yourself, to be brought down to their knees. So the Egyptians are now in a position where they are so weakened that they, as lower people, have greater affinity with the Israelite slaves, and therefore a desire to give and reciprocate. So this is the idea of the Chizkuni. In September 2003, Dr. Nabil Hilmi, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at Zakazik University, prepared a lawsuit against all the Jews of the world. And it's part of what he put forward. You Google him, you'll see there are many different write-ups of this. It was all over the place. The Egyptian pharaoh was surprised one day to discover thousands of Egyptian women crying under the palace balcony, asking for help and complaining that the Jews stole their clothing and jewels in the greatest collective fraud history has ever known. The theft was not limited to gold alone. The thieves stole everything imaginable. They emptied Egyptian homes of cooking utensils. One of the women approached Pharaoh, her eyes downcast, and said that her Jewish neighbor, who lived in the house on the right of her house, had come to her and asked to borrow her gold items, claiming she had been invited to a wedding. The Jewish neighbor took the items and promised to return them the next day. A few minutes later, the neighbor to the left knocked on the door, asking to borrow the cooking utensils because she was having guests to dinner. Using the same deceitful system, they took possession of all the cooking utensils. Carries on. And this wasn't just a narrative. I mean, this went into affidavits. It is clear why they stole the gold, but why the cooking utensils? Taking possession of the gold was understandable. This is clear theft of a host country's resources and treasure, something that fits the morals and character of the Jews. Yet what was not clear to the Egyptian women were the reasons for stealing the cooking utensils when other things may have been of greater value. However, one of the Egyptian priests said that this had been the Jews' twisted way throughout history. They seek to cause a minor problem connected with the needs of everyday life so as to occupy people with these matters and prevent them from pursuing them to get back the stolen gold. You know, the Egyptians are so busy scratching their heads. Why the cooking vessels? Why the cooking vessels? They didn't realize that 600,000 slaves had fled, taking all the wealth of Egypt with them. I love this bit. A police investigation revealed that Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them, understood that it was impossible to live in Egypt despite its pleasures, and even though the Egyptians included them in every activity, pyramid building for beginners, due to the Jews' perverse nature, to which the Egyptians had reconciled themselves, though with obvious unwillingness. Therefore, an order was issued by the Jewish rabbis to flee the country, and that the exodus should be secret and under cover of darkness and with the largest possible amount of loot. The code word was at midnight. In addition, the Jewish women were told to steal the gold and cooking utensils of the Egyptian women, and that's what happened. So the law case didn't go very far. But there are reports of it being drawn up and in investigations in Switzerland and people being called to give some evidence. What's interesting? Go on, somebody was about to say something there.
Oh, I was just going to ask, was it really serious or was it a Purim spiel?
No, the idea was very serious. Professor Hilmi is in 2018, he was talking about the Jewish plan to, Palestine was the beginning and Tehran is next on our list. So he's still, a couple of years ago, he was still around and making these accusations. What you have is, he's a serious law professor. I don't know how serious Zigzag University is, Zaki Zik University is, but he's a person of standing. And this idea that we cause minor problems connected with the needs of everyday life so as to occupy people with these matters and prevent them from pursuing to get back the stolen gold. The idea that there's a Jewish way. This is very much what we think about when we read the Nazi and really racist ideas. It's not just that we've done bad things. It's we've got a bad disposition. I mean, this isn't anti-Israel. This is very much anti-Jew in its representation and the way it comes across. So it's not the first time. So in Megillat Ta'anit, it's actually in an addendum to Megillat Ta'anit. We have the Egyptians said, it's written in the Torah, each woman should borrow from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold. Return our property to us, the Egyptians said. Hechziru lanu shalanu, give us back what's ours. And Geviha, a character, says, for 430 years, 600,000 Israelites were enslaved by you. Give each one of them 200 zuz per year of service, which amounts to 800. The original lawsuit that was being brought by Hilmi was for trillions of dollars. So here he says, give back 8,600,000 mana, and we will give you back your property. And the Egyptians, having to pay the reparations, did not see this through. They left with deflated spirits. And that's not the only reference we've got. We've actually got in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the same character, Gvia, spelled a little bit differently, comes up. And there's this whole case. I'm not going to read it. But the people of Egypt come to the Jewish people before Alexander the Great and say, the Lord gave the people favor in the eyes of Egypt and lent them. And the Egyptians say, give us back the silver and gold that you took from us. You claimed you were borrowing it and you never returned it. Right? The bits in bold are the accurate translation, and the bits in normal font are the way it's understood and interpreted to flesh it out in the Talmud. But you said borrow and you took. And so even the Gemara raises this as a question. And Alexander of Macedon says to Gvia, you know, answer this. And he answers it. And again, at the bottom there, they say, give us the wages of the work. We spent 430 years with you. Give us the wages for the work for the 600,000 men above the age of 20, whom you enslaved for 430 years. So Alexander of Macedon says to the Egyptians, give Gvia ben Psia a response. And they say, let's have some time. And eventually, after they've had some time, they decide they're not prepared to pursue the claim. It's going to be too expensive to pay the reparations for the slavery. Now, one idea that's important here is we believe that slaves should not be treated as slaves. A very important idea from certainly the Talmud. And people are entitled to recompense for their work. And the way that we have handled slavery, most of the Gemara's emphasis on slavery, which is largely in a post-slave era, but most of the Gemara's emphasis has always been on looking at the human rights of the individuals. But the other side of that, and that's clearly very important in a Pesach message, but the other side of it is we are not blind to the challenge of the problem that we said borrow and actually gave. And this sugya is found sandwiched between a couple of other Gvia ben Pesisa cases, and then moves on to a number of other cases of dealings with great sages and people from the non-Jewish world. It's a fascinating area of Sanhedrin, but this is the Alexander the Great area. And Gvia ben Psisa has 3 judgments that he's involved in. And B'nai Afrikia, the people of Afrikia, which is not necessarily Africa, come to judgment in Yisrael, and they say, Eretz Canaan shalanuhi, the land of Canaan is ours, because it says, Eretz Canaan ligvuloteha, we're going to give you the land of Canaan and its borders up to its edges, was given to the son of Noah, or from Ham to Canaan, and therefore there is an inheritance there that they want to claim. And Gvia ben Psisa has a court case with them on that. And V'shuvpam, this is now after the Egyptian case, Shuvpam achad ba'u b'nei Yishmael v'nei Keturah, the children of Ishmael and Keturah, which is the later name for Hagar, who Abraham remarries and has children by in Bereshit. And they come lifnei Alexander Mokdon, before Alexander of Macedon, Amrullah, and they say to him, Eretz Canaan shalanu v'shalachem, the land of Canaan is ours and is yours. There is dual ownership of it. As it says, Ve'elu toldot Yishmael ben Avraham and Elu toldot Yitzhak ben Avraham. It says these are the generations of Ishmael, the son of Abraham. We're entitled to our share. And again, Gvia ben Psisa is responsible for letting them leave without what they had wanted. But the Talmud is very aware of this as a concern for the non-Jewish world. just so I wanted to look at this idea of us taking their wealth, and I think it's an interesting one. And if you're looking for something to discuss around the Seder table with all your many guests this year, with everybody who you haven't got this year, if you're looking to discuss something ahead of Pesach, put something out before Pesach, if you're looking for a book to share with people for Pesach, and this idea of the morality of it all and the different perspectives is actually quite an interesting one. We normally look at ourselves as the victims in the story, coming out as the victors, which is certainly true. But there's this whole question about the morality of our own conduct within the story, and a discussion on what is it to ask, what is a loan, were we entitled to wages, how were the Egyptians feeling towards us. I love the idea that there is transparency in what we do, from Hirsch, or the Abarbanel's idea that we need to present ourselves with a certain macho image in order to project who we now were. So these ideas I thought were very lovely. This year's Seder night falls on Motzei Shabbat. If you were really quick, you noticed that I made a mistake in the first text I sent out today, and I said it falls on Erev Shabbos, and we dealt with that very quickly. That's what happens when you load these things up when you're on the phone. This year's Seder night falls on Motzei Shabbat. It last happened in 2001, 2005, and 2008. It won't happen again till 2025. And then not till 2045, 2048, and 2052. So, Mummy, you can enjoy it on your 100th birthday as well. This year, it happens on, now everybody's doing the maths. This year it falls on Friday night. That leads to clearly a number of things being different. Normally, Erev Seder begins on the night of the 13th, becoming the 14th of Nisan, and we have Bedikat Chametz on the 13th, becoming the 14th. And on the 14th in the morning, we have a Siyum, or a fast, and we stop eating Chametz at a certain time, and we have to sell our Chametz by a certain time. This year, the 14th of Nisan is going to be Shabbos, so we're not going to be fasting, and we are not going to be burning Chametz. So what do? We can't burn the chametz in the morning. We can't eat matzah in place of challah. What are we supposed to do? So the fast of the firstborn happens on Thursday, the 25th of March. There will be a siyum. There will be a siyum online, and that happens on the Thursday. Bedikat chametz is done on the Thursday evening with the feather and the candle. The statement of nullification is said as normal at the end of the search, even though you've got a whole extra day till it's really Pesach. Biur chametz, we burn the chametz on the Friday morning. We can't do it on Shabbos. We burn symbolic chametz on Friday morning, and it is better to do it before the beginning of the 6th hour, which will be 11:04 in the morning on Friday. It's better to do this. I would say you'll get an article with this, and we'll be circulating it widely. So you don't need to note down the times. We'll be burning the chametz on the Friday morning, even though you can still eat the chametz. Normally, when we're burning the chametz, you're not going to be eating chametz afterwards. Now we certainly can be eating chametz afterwards, and we should be having minimal chametz when we make hamotzi, certainly on Friday night and on Shabbos morning. We'll get to those in a moment. Sale of chametz clearly has to be done before Shabbat. We've already, I think, uploaded, and possibly this week's Kol Kinlos will go out with the link to do your online sale of chametz, but it needs to be done by then. Shabbat meals. Easiest to eat kasher lePesach on a Shabbat. You do not want to be changing over immediately after Shabbos. That would be incredibly problematic. So you're going to be eating kasher lePesach meals, possibly on disposables. But, be sensitive to the environment. If you don't need to use disposables, don't use disposables. We need to make hamotzi on Friday night and Shabbat morning. It is best to make hamotzi really on chametz. It really is. You need to use small rolls or pita bread that doesn't leave crumbs, and they should be eaten away from your kasher lePesach table, even over another cloth. And after hamotzi, which you can enjoy with dips and salad, but I would suggest you don't dip things into chicken soup or have schnitzels in breadcrumbs. Even after hamotzi, you should wash your hands, get rid of all the crumbs, and not have bread or anything on the table for the rest of the meal. You need to, eat it over a paper tablecloth or whatever, and get rid of it. And any crumbs, shake into the garden for the birds to eat their hefka, and get rid of it. You don't want to be having crumbs in your bins, because you really shouldn't be at that stage. So get rid of any crumbs. Shabbat morning, real challenge. Even though I've said you should have hamotzi off real bread, it needs to be eaten before the end of the 4th hour, which is 10 a.m. The time to stop eating chametz is 10 a.m. So don't think you can go to shul and come back and have your lunch meal, or you can do that, but eat it, go to hashkama, or make hamotzi early. The last time for getting rid of your crumbs is the end of the 5th hour, which is 11:03 on that Shabbat morning. So you're not allowed to eat any chametz after 11:03. There is an alternative, and the alternative is to use egg matzah. Now, egg matzah is a problematic creature. Ashkenazim hold that egg matzah is not kosher for Pesach unless you have got particular dietary concerns. And that is often masked, where it references the tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, which says it's only for people with dietary concerns, is in very small print on the side of some of the matzah boxes. And people assume that it is kosher for Pesach for everyone. It really isn't. Egg matzah is matzah ashira, which is the opposite of lechem oni, poor person's food. It's rich food. And so that might be problematic. It's definitely not kosher for the Seder, where you need to have lechem oni. But according to opinions that say it's chametz, definitely there's no problem eating it for hamotzi and on Friday night and on Shabbos morning. You shouldn't be eating it late, because you're not supposed to have matzah of any description on the day of Pesach. And some people like me don't eat it from Purim onwards, but that's just a custom. You're not supposed to have matzah on the day of Pesach so that you can say the Shechianu and feel good about it. So people eat matzah ashira for the Friday night and the Shabbat morning, but try to avoid using it during Pesach itself. And the advantage is that you are not leaving chametz crumbs, because it is not chametz really, and it's not going to contaminate anything really, though avoid putting it in your soup, because certainly even gebrochts people would, or even non-gebrochts people would possibly have a problem with egg matzah being used in that. If it might be chametz, consult your local mekel posek if you have a need for particular concerns on that. You need to say on the Shabbos morning the bittul chametz expression, the kol chamira, by 11:03 a.m., same as getting rid of your crumbs and everything else. Sudah Shlishit, this is the real fun one. Making hamotzi for Sudah Shlishit is more problematic. The 17th century Magen Avraham suggests that Sudah Shlishit with real chametz should be eaten in the morning before the time that chametz is prohibited, i.e. before 10 o'clock. Alternatively, you should eat a chametz and matzah-free Sudah of fish, meat, or fruit, which is probably what I will be doing. So even though we normally try to make hamotzi, you should have mazonas for Sudah Shlishit normally. You can have a chametz and matzah-free Sudah of fish, meat, or fruit on that Sudah. Mazonot cakes made from matzah meal may be eaten after midday, as may matzah that has been completely changed through cooking, such as coating schnitzel or cooked in fish balls and things like that. So people always ask me about things which have been fried in matzah meal and etc. Is that a matzah problem? The answer to that is no. You can have cooked matzah until the end of the 9th halachic hour, which will be 3:07 p.m. on Erev Pesach. Note well, nota bene, many Pesach cakes and biscuits are made of potato flour or other non-grain ingredients, and the correct bracha from them is shahakol, not mazonot. Watch out for that with your kiddush on ozem cakes or whatever cakes you've got during Pesach themselves. Many of them are not mazonot. And just a reminder, you can't prepare for the Seder on Shabbat. You can't do any table laying or food preparation until Shabbat is out at 13 minutes after 7. We make Havdalah within Kiddush at the beginning of the Seder, where we will be making the bracha Hamavdil ben Kodesh LaKodesh. Last year's Pesach was very different from every other year. This year's is different from every other year. Last year we read about the plagues, and we're earlier on in the pandemic. At least this year we're looking forward to better times and even the opportunity, please God, at some time to travel. L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Next year, may we all be in Jerusalem. Thank you very much for joining me. I wish you all well and look forward to seeing you back in Shul, back on Zoom very soon. Thank you.
Rabbi, sorry, you haven't talked about British summertime coming in.
Oh, I haven't talked about British summertime. It's true. The British summertime one is Motzei Yontef, the first day going into second day Yontef. The answer is clearly you are not allowed to change your clocks. You are going to have some of your clocks that are automatically updating, moving themselves onto summertime and going an hour back. You're going to have the ones that you're wearing on your wrist not going an hour back. Certainly if you've got an analog one like mine, not going an hour back. And you are going to be operating in 2 different time zones. We are going to be putting out the information according to both time zones just to confuse everybody. Speak to your friends. Check in with your neighbors. If it is light, you shouldn't be making starting the Seder. Not supposed to start the Seder early. It's going to be a little bit of a confusion, but it's actually not the end of the world. Everybody knows that the Seder will begin at past. Can't tell you past what, but it will begin at past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Clocks go forward. Thank you. Yes, Mummy.